As I address you, it's pretty funny because I mentioned this to the officer that, to Kevin as I just came in. I took this position, I've been here 26 years. I served in the police service, then we amalgamated. So I've spent all my time as a police officer in this community. But when I took this new position, as the investigator within the intelligence covert officer that oversees the drugs and the guns and gangs and the pivot officers that you see, including the street crime, that was exactly a year ago. And it was exactly a year ago on the 6th that we had a very large meeting in this community, and I see some of the faces. I forget names, but I never forget faces. I see some of the same people that were here because you had a lot of concerns at the time. I didn't speak. I spoke to some of you individually, but I didn't take the podium. It was my second day on the job. And what I generally do when I take over a position is I like to observe, and I like to listen. Okay, so that was really my introduction to your community concerns, your fears, your observations. And at that point, and I can say like today will be my 1-year report card, okay? Because I'm gonna speak to you. At the end of the day, before I leave, you'll tell me, okay, did we do okay? What can we work on? Okay, because I listened to you and I listened. I also listened to the officers that was working. So I can give you a general overview of some of the changes that have happened in the last year, okay? And I also can tell you some of the impacts. I do have some statistics for you that I can share with you. Once again, it's not a presentation. I've never been very much of a guy that likes to point at PowerPoint, so it's great that we're gonna have this conversation. Having said that, what I clearly observed last year, we had a community that had a lot of incidents, a lot of violence incidents, a lot of shootings, okay? Last year at this time, we had 25 incidents in the Ward 10, okay? I'm happy to say, and I'm not gonna take claim, a lot of the work has to do with a lot, and I'll mention some of the work some of these officers have done. We're down to 7 incidents this year, okay? So when you look at 25, you look at 7, somebody who's a statistician will tell you, well, those are not very large numbers. You can't really determine anything. Well, that shows me a 72% decrease. Well, I'm very happy that I didn't come to you today, a year later, to say, well, a 72% increase, okay? But still, those 7 incidents are 7 incidents too many, okay? Because if it happened outside your door, if you happen to have lived a traumatic event, you see the lights and siren, guess what you're gonna say? Here again, we have an incident in our community. So to me, I would love to one day come before you and say, guess what? This year we have none, okay? I'm not there, but I say we had quite a bit of decrease. What has happened within the investigative realm, and we can touch a little bit on the last homicide, which was a tragic incident where a young man lost his life. But I can tell you what's happened generally within the investigative realm, and I'm gonna let Kevin jump in when it comes to the NRT teams, and I'll speak a little bit about the pivot teams. Many of you probably remember the DART unit of the day. Now they're currently the pivot teams. I can tell you how they've been deployed, what their actions have been. Since we last met, we've increased our numbers. We do have, we did get some provincial funds, a couple $1 million that's for the last couple of years that's enabled us to really add to the number of personnel that we've had within the Guns and Gangs unit, also within the pivot teams. Where you should know where those resources have been applied. What we've been able to do is include a permanent firearm examiner. As you know, one of the greatest issues we have in this country actually is that trying to determine when we do have a crime gun, a firearm, is how to trace it. So I do have an individual within the unit who is permanently assigned to do that. I was able to increase the number of investigators by 4. By doing that, I was able to take all the investigations in regard to the firearms. They were all being handled by very great investigators, but depending on the area, geographic area, they were in different areas. I was able to take all that intelligence information, put it all under one roof, so I'm responsible for that information. It helps with the intelligence and tracking, and also helps me as the leader of the units to actually have a better understanding of what's happening in the city. We were able to do that. We were also able to take 6 individuals and add them to the pivot teams. And the difference between the DART and the pivot teams is that now we have 2 full teams. The difference with the neighborhood officers that also state that the pivot teams operate a little bit differently. They're not attached to a geographical area. Sorry if I move a lot, you're gonna have to do this sort of thing. Yes?
Sorry, I don't know what a pivot team or what a
Prevention,
DART team is.
Intervention Violence in Ottawa. DART was a direct action response team. They were officers that once there was an incident, we would be able to use them and focus them in the general area. You'll see them, they usually wear a G&G in the back of their vest. Their uniform's a little bit different. They're a little bit higher trained. They're trained in some, one of the training that we provide our officers is characteristics of an armed person. So we give them a little additional training, and we use them very much in conjunction with our investigative branch as an arm of that investigative branch. So this year, they've been more using in a proactive capacity. I've increased the percentage of time those officers spend in the community, okay, versus always being reactive, being proactive. You need to know community policing at its basics. Okay, I'm one of those individuals. I've never seen myself as a police officer before I was a community member, because as soon as I take this uniform off, I'm just Cartwright, or some of the kids refer to me Inspector Carl. Okay, I never. So to me, there's never been much of a difference. But let's admit, and if I'm going to go off track a little bit, if you were to ask me what's the greatest barrier of success, and the chief sort of hinted to that a little earlier, is really we need the trust of the police. And the police needs to help us, because we have some very keen and great young men and women in this organization, some older too, still keen, who are willing to do the job, but we can only achieve so much. However, we've had very little input from the outside, from any community member, and in some cases, the victims themselves, I'll be honest with you, have not only been uncooperative, but been deceitful themselves. So that makes it very hard. And when the chief stated that the clearance rate is quite low, those are some of the major impacts why those clearance rates are very low. It's not out of lack of effort. But once again, I was saying the pivot teams, they've been very crucial this year by spending a lot more time on the street with liaising with our frontline officers, because truly the frontline officers, the officers that you see in uniform, it doesn't matter all the fancy tech that you provide us. Without the boots on the ground, the officers talking to people, meeting people, and actually meeting the needs of the individual citizens, we can't accomplish anything. So we've incorporated that, but having this team embedded within the intelligence sector, they were always aware of information, but we've seen fit to now really send a lot more information down to our officers. Even now that they have their cell phones, we have developed a new, it's not an app, but we're working on an app right now. It's on our intranet, so that when we have very focused activities that we know impacts community safety and well-being, we do that. I call that, I've stolen a word that I read in a book somewhere. It says precision policing.